Allow me to introduce myself. I am Claire. I am 42 years old, and to an outside observer, it may appear that I possess all the trappings of a fulfilled life that any woman could desire. A harmonious union, a charming home nestled in a serene suburban enclave, 2 college-age children who still reach out on Sundays, and a husband with a commendable career that ensures meals are plentiful and getaways are scheduled. Yet, should you find yourself in my kitchen on any ordinary evening, the reality would be laid bare before you. You would find me arranging the table for 2, warming up the familiar meals I've prepared countless times, anticipating the arrival of a man who either strolls in late or dines in silence, his gaze fixed on his phone. The air would carry a biting cold, devoid of mirth, lacking the warmth of connection. My marriage didn't shatter dramatically. Instead, it faded gradually, much like cliffs being gently worn away by the relentless tide. I had no anticipation of any shifts occurring. I had come to accept the monotony, the quietude, and a form of companionship that resembled a contractual obligation rather than true affection. On a sweltering July afternoon, a moving truck rumbled into the driveway of the neighboring house. I recall the moment I wiped my hands on a dish towel, standing by the window filled with curiosity. The house stood vacant for months, stirring endless speculation among neighbors about who might take up residence. I envisioned a family, perhaps an older couple seeking to simplify their lives. What unfolded before my eyes brought me to a standstill. He was in the bloom of youth, perhaps in their mid to late 20s, slender yet robust, effortlessly transporting boxes with grace. The oppressive heat caused his t-shirt to cling to his back, and occasionally he would pause to sweep a stray strand of dark hair from his eyes. He stood alone, unloading the remnants of a life into the house next door, with no wife or girlfriend in sight. For reasons I couldn't articulate, I sensed my heart race. He was only a fraction of my years. He might have been a friend to my children. Yet, I lingered at the window far longer than intended, observing him as he made trip after trip. That evening, I resolved to take the action that any considerate neighbor might undertake. With care, I crafted a loaf of banana bread, nestled it among a selection of fresh fruit in a charming basket, and made my way next door. My hands quivered slightly as I pressed the bell. As he swung the door open, the first thing that caught my eye was his radiant smile. A radiant open smile that has the power to illuminate an entire visage. "Hello," he remarked, wiping his brow with a casual gesture. "You must be my neighbor." I nodded, a sudden realization washing over me about how overdressed I appeared in my summer dress. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said, extending the basket toward them. "I assumed you may not have found the time to prepare a meal just yet." He grasped it from my hand, his fingers grazing against mine ever so gently. "Your kindness is truly appreciated. I am Daniel." Daniel. The name was a perfect fit for him. Clear and powerful. We exchanged words for a brief moment on the threshold. Concerning the community, the prime spot for grocery shopping, the unique characteristics of the avenue. His voice flowed effortlessly, and his laughter rang true and genuine. As I prepared to walk away, he remarked, "Thank you truly. It feels good to be welcomed." As he smiled at me once more, I sensed a stirring within, an awakening of something that had lain dormant for years. That evening, I reassured myself it was merely a trivial matter. A simple act of kindness, a momentary response to the presence of a stranger. Yet, the reality is that he occupied my thoughts while I scrubbed the dishes, as I lay beside my husband, listening to his rhythmic snoring, and as I gazed at the ceiling, pondering when I had last felt the intensity of someone's gaze upon me, like the one Daniel had given me in that fleeting instant. In the days that followed, our paths crossed frequently. Hauling furniture, trimming the grass, relaxing on his porch with a cold beer as the sun sets. With every wave he offered, I responded in kind, mirroring his gesture with my own. "Hey there. Just wanted to drop a quick note and say hi. Hope you're having a great day." Nothing else. Yet an undeniable energy lingered between us, an unvoiced understanding that we both chose to ignore. I convinced myself it was merely a figment of my imagination. I was merely feeling isolated, attributing significance to acts of kindness. It was on that fateful evening, as I tended to the blooms in my garden, that he approached the fence. "Those are stunning," he remarked, gesturing toward the roses I had cultivated years prior. I chuckled, feeling a touch of embarrassment wash over me. They possess an unwavering resolve. They flourish on their own terms, not according to my desires. His gaze held onto me for a heartbeat longer than required, and a flush crept into my cheeks. There are moments that demand patience, he murmured gently before retreating indoors. It was merely a trifle, merely a collection of letters. Yet they nestled within me, profound and unquiet. That evening, as my husband returned home once more after hours, mumbling something about a client dinner before retreating into his office, I found myself at the kitchen table, a glass of wine in hand, lost in thoughts of Daniel's smile. I loathed myself for it. I loathed the way it awakened my senses. For beneath the surface, I sensed that this marked the dawn of something significant. Beginnings possess an uncanny ability to draw you into realms you once vowed to avoid. The days that came after Daniel's relocation merged seamlessly into the cadence of summer. Endless daylight, sultry nights, and the cicadas serenading from the branches above. Yet, the arrival of a new neighbor appeared to stir something within me, a delicate disturbance in the calm surface of my existence. I reassured myself that it posed no danger. The whispers of neighbors fill the air. Neighbors greet with a friendly wave. In the tapestry of community, small acts of kindness weave connections between neighbors. Every time I spotted him outdoors, whether he was lugging groceries or hauling his trash bin to the curb, my heart would betray me, racing with an undeniable fervor. On a serene Saturday afternoon, I found myself kneeling in my garden, diligently pulling weeds when suddenly, his voice reached my ears. "Could you use some assistance with that?" I glanced upward, and there he stood, nonchalantly propped against the fence that separated our properties. He donned a worn t-shirt and jeans, his hair still moist from a recent shower, his smile languid yet inviting. "I believe I've figured it out," I remarked, wiping the soil from my gloves. "I appreciate it." He pushed the gate aside, disregarding any need for consent, and knelt down next to me. "I don't mind. Moreover, a breath of fresh air would be quite welcome after spending the entire morning unpacking boxes." I ought to have raised my voice in dissent. I ought to have pressed the issue. Instead, I discovered a smile creeping onto my face as he effortlessly pulled a stubborn weed from the earth. We engaged in conversation while we toiled away. Initially, they spoke of inconsequential matters, his career in graphic design, the various places he had called home prior to this move, and how this neighborhood offered a tranquility unlike any he had previously experienced. I discovered I was revealing thoughts I seldom voiced, that I once immersed myself in painting before the demands of life took over, that I often felt as though I was in a perpetual state of anticipation, yet unclear about what I was truly waiting for. He paid attention, truly attentive. His gaze lingered on mine, focused, unhurried. It was disconcerting the way I felt so exposed. It had been years since my husband had gazed at me in such a way. As the sun sank beneath the horizon and the evening air turned crisp, I retrieved 2 glasses of iced tea. We lingered on the porch steps, earth beneath our fingertips, perspiration glistening on our brows. It felt strikingly personal, as if we had exchanged something deeper than mere labor in the garden. At one moment, his knee grazed against mine. A momentary caress. Yet it coursed through me, a sudden shock, vivid and inescapable. I moved just a bit, feigning indifference, yet every fiber of my being was acutely conscious of the distance, or the absence of it, separating us. "I appreciate your assistance," I murmured, my tone gentler than I had meant it to be. He smiled, that same genuine smile from the moment our paths first crossed. "Just a reason to be out in the fresh air," he remarked. Yet, the way his gaze held on to me suggested he had deeper intentions. That evening, as I stood under the cascading water, cleansing the grime from my body, I found myself revisiting the events of the afternoon in a relentless loop. As his hand lightly grazed mine while he handed me the iced tea, his laughter echoed through the silent corners of my soul. He listened in a way that made my words feel significant. I reclined in bed beside my husband, who had succumbed to slumber, and gazed up at the ceiling. The weight of guilt bore down on me, relentless and suffocating. Nothing transpired. Nothing genuine. And still my thoughts were consumed by Daniel, while my body thrummed with an inexplicable energy. The week that followed, I made an effort to steer clear of him. I spent more time indoors. I drew the curtains closed as soon as I realized he was out there. Yet, longing possesses an uncanny ability to discover the fissures in the barriers we construct. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I stepped outside with a bag of recycling just as he returned, clutching his stack of mail. As our gazes locked from opposite ends of the driveway, an uncontrollable wave of warmth surged through me. "Hey," he said, his tone relaxed and easygoing. "Hey," I replied, making an effort to keep my tone steady. He approached, the dwindling sunlight casting a gentle golden hue across his features. In that fleeting moment, silence enveloped us both. The stillness lingered, electric, reminiscent of the moment just before the tempest breaks. "You know," he remarked at last, his voice carrying a hint of mischief, "I never had the chance to truly express my gratitude for the banana bread." I chuckled uneasily. "It was merely a trifle. It meant nothing to me," he replied, his gaze unwavering as it met mine. "It seemed as though you truly cared." The words are trapped within my heart. For he was indeed correct. And because I understood deep within that I desired him to experience precisely that. I took a deep breath, managing to conjure a smile. Indeed, it's essential for neighbors to watch over one another. His eyes remained steadfast. Indeed. Indeed they ought to. In an instant, he pivoted and strode away toward his home, while I stood there in the driveway, quaking, grasping an empty bag as though it might anchor me. As the evening unfolded, I found myself indulging in a second glass of wine, followed by a third. I reassured myself that I was being naive, that I was overanalyzing mere words, interpreting innocent gestures with too much weight. The reality was inescapable. The barrier separating our homes was merely constructed of wood and nails. And the barrier that separated us, between my reality and my desires, was starting to fracture. The tempest descended upon me like an unwelcome idea I had been suppressing, gradually at first, then suddenly overwhelming. As the evening wore on, the sky draped itself in a deep, uniform darkness, while the trees lining our street seemed to bend in a hushed reverence, attuned to whispers only the tempest could discern. I placed a candle on the kitchen counter, convincing myself it was a practical choice rather than a nod to superstition. At 10 o'clock, the house exhaled softly and succumbed to darkness. It lacked any theatrics. Instead, it was a gentle, accepting fading, as if my home had merely chosen to drift into slumber. The refrigerator ceased its gentle hum. The atmosphere grew briefly more tenuous. I lingered at the counter, my hands resting on its surface, anticipating the automatic kickback that never arrived. Suddenly, 3 sharp raps echoed at the back door. I recognized the presence even before my hand touched the handle. As I swung the door open, a beam from a flashlight meticulously traced its way up the porch steps, illuminating Daniel's face, droplets of rain glistening on his lashes. "Are you all right?" he inquired, his voice barely rising above the tumult of the elements. "I'm fine," I replied, perhaps a bit too hastily. "Simply a loss of power." "Half the block," he remarked, directing the beam toward my foyer as if he were hesitant to impose. "I thought I'd see how you're doing. I ought to have expressed my gratitude and let him return home. Instead, would you like to step inside? Until it moves on?" His expression remained unchanged, yet there was a softening in his posture, almost as if he had found relief. He crossed the threshold, gently shutting the door behind him as if he understood the importance of respecting the sanctity of others' spaces. We navigated the house with 2 candles and his flashlight, the beam gliding over walls and picture frames, as if we were guardians of a sanctuary devoted to a more serene existence. In the living room, the storm clawed at the windows with relentless fervor. We settled on the rug beside the coffee table, the candles flickering between us, casting a warm golden glow around the room's edges. For a brief moment, we were enveloped by the sound of rain, a gentle cascade that unfolds in layers, transitioning to sharp points, followed by a silence so fleeting it feels as though the universe has chosen to absolve you, just before the next surge descends. "Share a truth with me," he urged, as though we were engaged in a game governed by unspoken rules known solely to him. The flashlight rested on its face, casting a gentle beam of light that danced upon the ceiling. "That lacks courtesy." Indeed, I might have mentioned that I was weary. The defrosting of the freezer would spell disaster for the ice cream. The storms continue to instill a sense of fear in me, especially when the house is empty. At times, I wonder if I cease to exist as an individual and transformed into merely a mechanism. His gaze remained unwavering. For whom? For everybody. I chuckled, though the sound felt fragile. Spouse, parent, community member, entertainer. Supportive, trustworthy, consistent, practical. He reclined on his hands, deep in thought. Do you recall what caught my attention on the very first day? He inquired. My banana bread, I ventured, and he smiled, appreciative of the humor. No, he murmured gently. You're quiet. The kind that lacks tranquility. The candle danced with a gentle flicker. The space around us appeared to contract, leaving just his words and the rhythm of my heartbeat in the air. That's quite perceptive for someone who hardly knew me. I've always had a knack for observation, he remarked, a subtle smile playing at the corners of his lips. It's an inherent risk of being in the design field. You spend your entire day inquiring about the thoughts of something that believes it's merely existing in silence. The flickering flame of the candle held my gaze. What is it that I am expressing? So you've been anticipating the return of the lights, he remarked. Not those within the confines of the home. The rain eased into a gentle whisper. The stillness that enveloped us transformed into something altogether new. Now it's your turn, I remarked, sensing the imbalance of having only myself exposed to scrutiny. Share a truth with me. He glanced at his hands before meeting my gaze. I relocated here to see if I could begin anew without offering any reasons. He shrugged slightly. There's no dramatic tale of a breakup. There is no tragedy. My life seemed to shrink, confined to a space far too small for the years I've lived. I grew weary of being undervalued due to my youthful appearance. A subtle smile appeared. Just so you know, I'm 29. Your eyes narrow as if you're calculating something in your mind. I attempted to feign ignorance of my presence. 29, I echoed, as though I were gauging the resonance of the number on my tongue. What about you? He inquired, unreserved. 42. The figure resonated perfectly. You make 29 seem like an enticing prospect. He chuckled softly, a mix of delight and astonishment dancing in his eyes. It wasn't so much a dance of flirtation as it was an acknowledgement between two souls of the undeniable pull of gravity, contemplating the leap into the unknown. The electricity remained absent. Time unraveled. We exchanged thoughts on trivial matters, our preferred breakfasts, the ultimate road trip playlists, the most dreadful jobs we had endured, until those trivialities quietly paved a path to deeper conversations, unnoticed by either of us. He recounted the city he departed from, companions skilled at remaining 23, a job that instructed him to perform the duties of 3, all for the compensation of 1. I shared with him my journey with painting, how I paused after my second child, perpetually intending to resume when time allowed, and how time in response chose to elude me. In an instant, a flash of lightning sliced through the dimness of the room, revealing him with startling clarity. The damp curl resting against his temple, the intensity in his gaze that transformed me into a developing image in a darkroom. The thunder that came after was tardy and somewhat embarrassed by its own presence. May I express something without you assuming I'm not quite sure. Is it a cliché? He inquired. Feel free to give it a shot. On the day I arrived, he remarked, I made a promise to myself to ignore your presence. You seem so distant. He sought the completion of the thought and discovered it without shame. Yet, it is a pursuit deserving of our effort. One could have easily found amusement in the situation. To reprimand, to evoke memories of boundaries and circles, and figures such as 42 and 29. Instead, my chest reacted in a manner I found unacceptable. I'm not unreachable, I said, the words slipping out with an unintended vulnerability. I'm careful. I can exercise caution, he asserted. Silence enveloped us once more. The candles flickered, their cups now overflowing with a warm golden glow. The air was tinged with a subtle blend of match smoke and the fresh scent of rain. Daniel, I uttered, his name heavy on my tongue more than I intended. It would be wise to return home before the streets become inundated. He remained silent. He merely inclined his head, the faintest gesture, as if he were consenting to a pact we had forged to endure this very night. We rose simultaneously, nearly crashing into one another. It was merely a slight error, 5 inches off, but it felt as though a hidden door had swung open in the shadows. His hand rose instinctively to steady my elbow. Mine moved naturally to his forearm. Fire encountered fire. Neither of us stirred. An unexpected, almost absurd notion struck me. If the power were to return at that very moment, the ensuing brightness would expose our vulnerability. As though the shadows had been a loyal companion, while the light played the role of a meddlesome chatterbox. "Claire," he said, the name hanging in the air, devoid of inquiry or desperation. It felt akin to a vow, a commitment to inhale once more, but only if I shared that moment with him. I took a step back initially. The distance we created between us was akin to a raw wound, one we were attempting to stitch together without the comfort of numbness. "I appreciate you reaching out," I replied, a mere whisper of the deeper truth that lingered unspoken within me. He swallowed and smiled. "Not hurt, not insulted, just mindful." "At any moment," he replied, "more than merely for storms." At the threshold, my hand resting on the chilled brass, I sensed the neighborhood stir momentarily. Appliances exhaling their initial sighs, a neighbor's porch light flickering back to alertness. The power surged back, sudden and nearly impolite, saturating the room with a brighter kind of atmosphere. "Naturally," I murmured into the void, then turned to him. "It seems we made it through." He looked up at the unexpected light, then turned his gaze back to me. "You accomplished more than that." I was curious about what he intended to convey. I did not. The door swung open before me. The rain had transformed into a gentle, unbroken flow. He made his way onto the porch, pausing to glance back as he pulled the hood of his jacket up. "Sleep well, Claire," he murmured. "Good night," I replied, and as I shut the door, my hands were more composed than I had anticipated, which only deepened the unease. I moved from room to room, extinguishing the lights that the house had joyfully returned to me, reluctant to reveal myself to my own surroundings. In the bathroom mirror I saw a woman who appeared innocent, yet deep within, I sensed a transformation had taken place. I placed my fingertips on my elbow, where his hand once rested, and discovered the lingering trace of warmth still present. In bed, my husband's side remained cool, untouched by the tempests outside. I lay awake, attuned to the gutters as they rediscovered their purpose, and endeavored to enumerate all the ways I had exercised caution. The enumeration stretched on endlessly. It offered no solace. The reality was straightforward and bare. The barrier separating our homes had withstood the gusts of the wind. The boundary separating what was from what is yet to come had not been established. With the dawn of a new day, the street lay refreshed and pristine. Branches cluttered the gutters, leaves clung to the sidewalks, and puddles reflected shards of the persistently overcast sky. I stepped outside with my coffee in hand, feigning an interest in the hydrangeas that perpetually sagged after a downpour. Yet, I found myself reflecting, wondering if the events of the previous night had been nothing more than a figment of my imagination, or if the heaviness in my chest signified a truth I could no longer ignore. Daniel had stepped outside. He knelt by the fence line, sleeves pushed up to his elbows, pulling at the debris ensnared around the base of the hedge. The scene took me by surprise, not merely due to his presence, but also because of its sheer simplicity. In that moment he appeared anything but alluring. He resembled someone from the neighborhood, a youthful individual engaged in household tasks. And yet my pulse quickened as if he were looming over me once more, so near that I could catch the scent of rain on his skin. He raised his gaze. Our gazes locked over the weathered wooden fence, still glistening with the remnants of the storm. "Morning," he murmured, his voice gravelly from slumber. "Morning," I said, raising my mug as if it were a shield against the day ahead. "Is everything all right with your power?" "Indeed. I returned shortly after your departure." He nodded, and for an instant, it felt as though that was everything. "Yet," he remarked, "I couldn't shake the thought that I ought to have remained until it happened, merely to confirm." I took a slow sip of my coffee, buying myself a moment before responding. "You have done more than enough." His gaze held, neither intrusive nor accidental but intentional. "I'm not certain that's accurate," he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. making me wonder if he intended for me to catch his words at all. That week the skies brightened, yet the tempest within me raged on. Every morning, I rose and reminded myself to tuck Daniel into the secure compartment of neighborly goodwill. Every night I find myself wide awake, revisiting the moment his hand had anchored my arm, how the term unreachable had shattered within me. And then one afternoon destiny, or perhaps something more audacious, intervened once more. In the backyard, I found myself kneeling beside the herb bed that had long been overlooked. The sun was unusually assertive, causing beads of sweat to form on my neck. That morning my husband departed for yet another conference in Chicago, and the stillness of the house had become overwhelmingly pronounced. The earthy sensation of soil beneath my fingernails was a welcome diversion. Looking for assistance. A sudden voice broke through the silence, catching me off guard. Daniel lingered at the threshold dividing our yards, a coil of garden hose clasped in his hands. His shirt clung subtly at the chest, a testament to the labor he had been engaged in. "I believe I can handle it," I replied, sweeping my hair away from my forehead with the back of my wrist. He moved in, resting effortlessly against the fence. "Your expression suggests doubt." I chuckled, a sound too piercing, too guarded. "Are you always this perceptive?" "It's only when someone attempts to appear well when they're truly not," he responded. I stood still, my gaze fixed on the small patch of rosemary that now appeared strikingly sincere in its untamed beauty. He crouched low, narrowing the gap between us, with only the fence standing as a barrier. "You are worthy of more than merely weathering the storms," he murmured softly. "Even the silent ones." The words fell between us, heavy and forbidden. I ought to have urged him to cease. I ought to have risen, cleared the grime from my knees and stepped through the door. But instead I whispered, "And what if I don't know how?" His hands gripped the top of the fence, knuckles pale. "Perhaps it's time for someone to jog your memory." We lingered in that place, bound by unseen connections, the sun cascading down upon us as if bearing witness. My breath caught in my chest. His gaze locked onto mine, as if he feared that I would disappear the moment he turned his attention elsewhere. At last I disrupted the stillness by rising to my feet and dusting off my jeans. "I ought to complete this before nightfall." He nodded, yet his jaw clenched as if he were restraining a torrent of thoughts that he felt he shouldn't share. "Of course." He pivoted, crossing the threshold into his own yard. Relief should have washed over me. In that moment, the absence hit me with an intensity akin to a sharp chill in the air. That evening, the meal lacked flavor. The house resonated with a profound emptiness, yet it was saturated with the weight of his absence. I scrubbed the dishes with a deliberate slowness, my gaze drifting out the window to his house. A glow emanated from his upstairs window, and I glimpsed his silhouette gliding across the room. Merely a silhouette devoid of substance. There I remained, hands damp and heart racing, as though it held all the significance in the world. I sought to convince myself that it was merely a fleeting moment, a fleeting desire sparked by solitude. Yet, beneath the surface I was aware of the truth. A chain of events had begun the night the tempest extinguished the lights. An unbreakable bond, impervious to barriers, promises, or the quietude of civility. The question was never about whether. It was at that moment. It unfolded on a night that began as unremarkable, perhaps even too unremarkable. My husband had vanished once more, swept away by yet another late-night meeting that spilled into a business dinner, accompanied by a text that read, "Don't wait up." I did not. I filled my glass with wine, yet it had the flavor of mere water. I attempted to immerse myself in the pages, yet the letters danced and faded before my eyes. The stillness hung heavily in the air, resonating through every nook and cranny of the home. As if pulled by an unseen force, I found myself positioned by the back window, gazing at the soft golden light that spilled from Daniel's living room. He stood there. I watched him as he moved about, a record spinning languidly on his player, soft jazz melodies wafting through the stillness of the street. His gaze was elsewhere. He was under no obligation to do so. My heartbeat was already aware of its desired destination. The choice feels like a blur, lost in the recesses of my mind. In one fleeting moment I found myself barefoot in my kitchen. In the next I stood at his front door, my hand quivering against the solid wood. 3 sharp raps echoed through the silence. Softly reserved, uncertain. I found myself silently wishing he wouldn't catch a word of it. Yet he did. The door swung wide, revealing him, his shirt hanging casually, hair a bit disheveled, as though he had been waiting for my arrival all this time. His surprise glimmered briefly before transforming into a gentler emotion. Perilous situation. Is everything all right? He inquired, even though we were both aware of the truth.
No, y murmurat softly.
My throat constricted. I find myself yearning for companionship this evening. For a heartbeat, silence lingered between us, delicate and weighty. I might have chosen to withdraw. I ought to have. Instead, he stepped aside, granting me entry. The air was tinged with a subtle blend of cedar and rain, reminiscent of him. The record hissed, a muted trumpet lamenting gently, as if voicing the unspoken truths we dared not articulate. I shouldn't be here, I whispered, my gaze flitting away from his piercing stare. I understand, he replied. His voice resonated with a calm, unwavering quality. Yet you are. At first, he didn't extend his hand towards me. He lingered, challenging me to be the one who stepped over the boundary. And with divine assistance I did. As I placed the untouched glass of wine he had offered me on the table, my hand lightly grazed his. Before I could withdraw, his fingers entwined with mine, holding on tightly. A change swept through the atmosphere. He leaned closer and murmured, "Should I stop?" Each promise, each limit, each justification for departure clashed within me. Yet what escaped my lips was the truth I had concealed beneath layers of unspoken words. Absolutely not. The initial contact was nearly sacred. His hand cradling my face, thumb gliding over my cheek as if I were fragile enough to break. In a sense, I truly did. All those years spent in solitude, lingering by windows, feigning that fine sufficed, shattered the instant his lips brushed against mine. It was not the spectacle of fireworks. It was more profound, more weighty. It feels akin to releasing a long-held breath, finally liberated after years of restraint. I couldn't tell you how long we lingered in that moment, ensnared by the weight of our actions, before the others joined us. His arm leading me to the couch, my heart racing as if it yearned to break free. Garments, language, reason. Everything dissolved until only warmth, flesh, and the exhilarating vulnerability of being truly perceived remained. When the silence finally settled in, it was not the oppressive kind that burdened my spirit. It was gentle, unwavering. His chest rose and fell beneath my cheek, his arms still wrapped around me as if he welcomed whatever the morning might unveil. Yet I truly was. I was certain that dawn would arrive. With it, guilt would intensify, reality would break through, and the barrier between our homes would cease to suffice in holding this secret at bay. As I reclined in that stillness, the soft murmur of the record needle tracing its eternal path resonated within me, revealing a singular truth that overshadowed all apprehension. The tempest had not merely extinguished my lights that evening. It had transformed my very essence. And there was no turning back.